Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Caesar as King by Historia Civilis. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm a little sick, that's why my voice sounds odd, and I apologize if I cough or clear my throat during this recording. I'm going to try and mute the microphone if I have to cough, so apologies for that. I'm just going to try and ignore that and get on with this recording, because this is a pretty exciting one. We are continuing Caesar's journey. Last time we saw him finally defeat and kill Labienus in battle. Now, presumably, we're back to Caesar's political journey, though the thing about Caesar is, as quickly as he rises, he begins to fall. So I imagine we will begin seeing some of the seeds of Caesar's downfall in this episode because, spoiler alert, the next one is about his assassination. So we are coming close to the end of Caesar's story. So this is a pretty exciting time. This is going to be a good reaction. If you guys end up enjoying this one, I'd appreciate it if you would become a channel member or check out the Patreon. Anyway, with that stuff out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction. Alright, Caesar as king. I hope not.
Julius Caesar's old friend, Titus Labienus, had been defeated. The Roman Civil War was officially over, and
Caesar's old friend turned one of his biggest rivals. Labienus was a committed opponent of Caesar ever since he turned against him and joined the Pompeians.
Spain had been pacified. After a few weeks of house cleaning, Caesar headed back to the capital. On the road to Rome, he met up with Mark Antony, who at one time had served as Caesar's political point man.
Yeah, the disastrous Mark Antony, who... Now look, he's not a total disaster. Mark Antony does have talents in some areas, but politically he's not very savvy, and we saw that as Caesar basically sent Mark Antony away from Rome for really messing up the job he was assigned.
A couple of years earlier, Antony had conducted himself like an absolute maniac while Caesar was away on campaign, in doing so, had found himself in Caesar's disfavor.
He had been replaced by Lepidus, who has become and will remain a very important character in this story, even after Caesar dies.
Caesar and Antony reunited, and the two spent several days catching up on the road. When it was time for Antony to leave, the two had mended their fractured relationship. Caesar forgave Antony and promised to make room for him in the years to come.
Okay, and that makes sense because, I don't know too many of the details, but what I do know, and I'm sure many of you guys know as well, is that along with Lepidus, Mark Antony is also going to be a prominent figure post-Caesar. So it makes sense that they sort of mended their relationship after Mark Antony sort of ruined things a few years back.
But there may have been more to this meeting than meets the eye.
Oh?
According to some ancient sources, just before Antony headed up the road, a cabal of senators approached him and asked for his help in removing Caesar from power.
Uh-oh.
Antony politely turned them down. But the interesting thing is that when Antony made amends with Caesar, he told him nothing of this conspiracy. What on earth was Antony doing? Did he not take the conspiracy seriously? Was he somehow hedging his bets? We have no idea.
We have no idea. We cannot go back in time and see, at least yet, maybe one day. And, the sources can't really substantiate one way or another. So it could have been that he didn't think it was serious, or it could have been many things, but knowing Mark Antony, I feel like he might have been hedging his bets, He wants to keep on Caesar's good side, but just in case, he's not going to let him know about these plots against him. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
But it's interesting. Marcus Brutus, who was serving as the governor of Cisalpine Gaul, also took this opportunity to come and meet with Caesar as he passed through his province. Caesar was happy with Brutus's performance and promised to fast-track his career in the years to come. Governor this year, praetor next year, consul 3 years after that. Brutus had a bright future ahead of him. Caesar arrived back in Rome late in the summer of 45. Instead of heading home, he lingered outside the Pomerium and petitioned the Senate to grant him a fifth triumph.
Jeez.
Naturally, they agreed.
Caesar's been getting real greedy for these triumphs lately. I mean, we saw the disaster of his last triumphs. I mean, he wanted 4 triumphs. Some of them were justifiable, such as the triumphs for his conquest of Gaul. That was triumph-worthy. Some of his other triumphs, which were basically triumphs celebrating Caesar's defeat of fellow Romans, were very much in bad taste and were received badly by the populace.
Caesar's 5th triumph was unlike any other triumph in Roman history. This triumph was all about the end of the Roman Civil War, which meant that it literally celebrated the defeat of a Roman army.
Yeah, so last time Caesar tried this, he pretended that the triumph was about King Juba and not the defeat of fellow Romans, but everybody knew what it was actually about. It was about Caesar defeating the Pompeians, and people really didn't like that. So I'm curious to see how this goes down, because this is even more obviously a celebration of Caesar defeating Romans, So also kind of seems in bad taste, but maybe Caesar can maneuver around it. He's made the mistake once before. Is he making the same mistake, or has he found a different way of doing it?
This was an illegal and illegitimate triumph, no matter how you looked at it. But the Senate didn't care. Caesar's allies were in control, and if Caesar wanted a triumph, Caesar would get a triumph.
Yeah, this is what the Senate does now. And I talked in previous videos about how this is sort of the start of the Senate's descent into an institution whose main and basically only goal is licking the boot of whoever is in charge. The tradition is starting now with the Senate trying to kiss up to Caesar so that they can maintain some of their authority. And, in some ways you do kind of get what they're going for. And this tradition will very much be cemented under Augustus, who deftly handled the Senate, allowing them to keep much of their prestige while they lost all of their power, and they basically kissed up to him again. So, this is sort of an ignoble journey that the Senate is continuing down.
The planning of a triumph was an art, and Caesar would spend a month or so meticulously going over every little detail. He settled on silver as the theme, since Spain was famous at the time for its silver mines.
This is totally unrelated, but that's kind of funny because, of course, if we look at modern history, the Spanish Empire would be famous for its silver mines in the Americas. So that's just sort of a very odd connection that just popped into my head.
The big day arrived, and the whole thing was unbelievably extravagant.
Wow.
But, as you might have already guessed, it was also in bad taste. Most
Again?
of Caesar's propaganda artwork depicted Romans killing Romans. Many in the crowd would have lost friends or family to the Civil War.
I love the music that's going on while Historia Civilis is describing this, because I think it perfectly represents the inherent contradiction of this triumph. It's this massive, grand celebration, and of course everybody there was witnessing and feeling that. But at the same time, it's somber, it's in bad taste, it's upsetting. So these, things are very much clashing, because Caesar sees it as a pure celebration, but to everybody else, it's way more complicated, and the message he's sending is very mixed.
And now here Caesar was rubbing their noses in it. What was meant to be a big public celebration turned out to be one big downer.
I can't believe you made the same mistake again. Caesar has always been brilliant at reading the public, right? He's been amazing at PR. He's good at playing to public perceptions. This is one of Caesar's greatest skills, and it's why he's such a great politician. But now, twice he's made the mistake of holding these triumphs in incredibly bad taste. It seems very unlike Caesar to me. I don't know what it is. Maybe the success, the victory is getting to his head. He's getting too confident, too cocky. I'm not sure, but definitely a bad move.
As Caesar was approaching the climax of the triumph, he rode past that year's government officials and magistrates. one of the tribunes of the plebs, a former Pompeian, made his feelings known to everybody by refusing to stand for the triumphator as he passed. Caesar noticed. According to one source, he called from his chariot, "Come on, Tribune Aquila, take back the Republic if you can."
Oh.
Caesar tried to play this off as a joke.
That's petty. Yeah, I can imagine how he would try to play it off as a joke, but that's one of those, like, way too soon type jokes. Everyone's like, dude, the Civil War just ended. Like, not cool. Yeah, these are really sort of bad moves from Caesar.
But it kind of wasn't. It really got under his skin. In the days following the triumph, in what should have been one of the high points of his career, he bitterly complained about this one tiny incident nonstop. He would issue some mundane order, like, deliver this letter to so-and-so, and then would be like, wait, better check to see if it's okay with Tribune Aquila first.
Oh, man. Dude, Caesar has always had a lot of ego. I think most, if not all men in such a position of power do, but it seems like his ego is inflating, at least from what we're hearing here.
Speaking of taking the Republic back, we need to talk about the political changes that Rome was experiencing over this period.
Yeah.
Just a quick reminder. Caesar had already been named dictator for a period of 10 years, and had been granted permission to run for consul for 5 years, which gave him unparalleled control over Roman politics. So that's our starting line. Things were about to get really weird. The sequencing of some of this stuff is kind of hard to nail down, but let's just say that over the span of 8 months, the following occurred. The Senate heaped all kinds of titles and honors upon Caesar.
Yep.
They named him Liberator. They named him Father of the Fatherland. They named him Imperator for life. All sorts of titles, all in the same vein. They allowed him to wear his special clothing from his triumph on all future festival days.
Well, what we're seeing is basically the transition from a republic to an empire. Now, Augustus is the first Roman emperor. He is who comes after Caesar, after some more civil strife. But, Caesar is beginning a lot of these traditions and shifting the political culture, a shift that Augustus will really complete. So we're basically seeing this process in action.
This would have been a flamboyant purple toga and a crown of laurel leaves.
And as I'm sure a lot of us know, purple will become, if it wasn't already, but it will become a color very much associated with the emperors and sort of royalty in general.
Very conspicuous. This clothing was deliberately designed to evoke the idea of monarchy.
Right.
Sure, it was purely symbolic, but Caesar liked it, and some found it disturbing how quickly he took to walking around in royal garb, like it was nothing.
And what I will say is, I think Augustus was sort of better at handling stuff like this. He was a little better at cementing his actual political power, while avoiding some of the outward signs of being a strongman. He absolutely was, but Caesar right now is very flamboyantly using monarchical symbols, which people don't really like. Augustus was a bit better at avoiding some of that stuff, or at least building up to it, right?
But that was only the beginning. In the heart of Rome, on the Capitoline Hill, there was a grouping of statues depicting each of the 7 kings of Rome, along with an 8th statue of the man who drove them out and established the Republic. That guy's name happened to be Brutus. I mentioned that for no reason whatsoever. Let's just move on.
How about that?
With the Senate's permission, Caesar added a 9th statue to this lineup of himself.
Oh,
Yikes.
Come on. I get it. I get it. Caesar's the guy, and he wants to show that he is the man in town. But his ego, it's really, I think, getting in the way of his good PR. Like I said, Caesar's always been very good at courting public opinion, and I feel like this stuff is really not helping him. He's lacking some of the political maneuvering that Augustus would bring to the job of emperor, though he was officially emperor, and Caesar's kind of leaping headfirst into making himself look very much like a monarch. Even though he's technically not, he's, bringing all of these things, setting up the statue, wearing purple. So to everybody else, it's like, are you trying to make yourself a monarch? And that's a really bad look, For a republic that's just gone through years of civil war, people really don't want to see that kind of thing. Caesar would be far more intelligent if he was able to secure power, which he's already done. The Senate has already granted him everything he wanted. Secure that power while still maintaining sort of the symbolism of the Republic. That would make people a little happier, I think.
Caesar was also named the Prefect of Morality, which was a made-up thing, and was given the power to kick people out of the Senate if they exhibited bad public morals, which naturally could be interpreted to mean literally anything.
And I will say, this is sort of a bad habit that Augustus kept. Augustus kept trying to legislate morality, though for him it seemed genuine. But, oftentimes all legislating morality does is just get people angry at you, because it's pretty hard to legislate people's sort of individual morality and individual choices. For Caesar, this seems like more of a political move. But for Augustus, it was also a political move, but a genuine one which sort of got in the way of his politics.
He didn't really need this power, since he had already packed the Senate with his political allies. But now, if anybody ever got out of line, they could be gone in a flash. As you can see, all of these changes were moving in the same direction. But Caesar wanted to make it even more blatant, so he got for himself a special golden chair that from now on would sit between the two consuls during Senate meetings. Now, I don't know about you, but where I'm from, we might call this a throne.
Yeah.
The Romans would have disagreed. Thrones were for kings. This was just a special golden chair reserved for the guy who dressed up like a king and acted like a king. Totally
Come on,
different.
man. Yeah, this is not... I just don't think this is a good move. I mean, he's already the guy with all the power, and yet he's linking himself back to a past that people don't want to return to. I mean, people are proud of the Republic. They've gone through years of strife and warfare, so that pride might be wounded, but people are certainly more proud of the Republic than they are of Rome's old kings. I mean, it's a point of Roman pride that they got rid of their system of monarchy and brought the Republic in. And so even if Caesar does want to be some sort of monarchical figure, which, I mean, clearly at this point he does, I really don't think this is the way to go about it.
This is by no means an exhaustive list, and there's even more to come, but you get the idea. Caesar spent these months cobbling together a collection of powers that essentially transformed him into a monarch in all but name.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of how Hemingway said that people go bankrupt gradually and then suddenly. The Roman political system had been in a state of degradation for years, decades, generations even. But then the whole thing collapsed in on itself in a matter of months. Sure, this had been precipitated by the Roman Civil War, but it's not like Caesar walked in there and overthrew the government. He didn't have to. What happened instead is that he pushed up against Rome's political institutions, found nothing pushing back, and then took whatever he wanted.
Yep. I mean, we've seen how the Senate basically bows to any pressure Caesar pushes on them. So I think that's exactly right.
What did this unchecked power reveal?
Not to mention, and I'm pretty critical of the Senate, but to be fair, the institutions of Rome, as we've seen throughout watching Historia Civilis' videos, the Roman institutions had sort of been crumbling away for years at this point, so they were already incredibly weak.
About Caesar. It revealed that what Caesar wanted, maybe what he had always wanted, was to destroy Roman politics. He wanted a crown. He wanted monarchy. Healthy political systems are extremely stable. Warts and all, the Roman Republic was a mostly healthy political system.
Yeah.
Caesar destroyed it, and he did so deliberately. This decision would result in untold human misery and death in the years to come. And the horrifying fact is that even if Caesar could have known this, I'm not sure that he would have cared.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we don't know, but I will say at this point, Caesar's ego seems to be quite massive, so he might be right. And I mean, following the death of Caesar, and ever since, Caesar has been a controversial figure. I mean, he's been revered by some for his power, his conquests, his authority, and he's been loathed by others for his tyrannical nature, his ending of the Republic. So he's been a very controversial figure up until the modern era. I mean, today you'll find contrasting opinions on Caesar during the Enlightenment and, the Renaissance, those years, the early modern into modern era. There was a lot of returning to old Roman and Greek texts, and there was a lot of debates about Caesar. Some saw him as a great conqueror to be emulated, and others saw him as a tyrant. So, yeah, I mean, you can look at him different ways.
That's egomaniacal. And
yeah.
in a way, it can't help but eclipse everything else he ever did.
That's true. I mean, I do think that's true. Caesar is a man of many facets. He's lived a full life, and we've seen his career through these videos, but all of that has been eclipsed by what he did during these years. Winning the Civil War, ending the Republic, and seizing power. I mean, that is what he's remembered for.
Some in Rome's political class were able to see what was happening, but they were wholly ineffective at stopping it. Cicero wrote a helpful little guidebook outlining how he thought the Republic ought to be restored, but Caesar's subordinates wouldn't even read it. In September of 45, Caesar stepped down as Rome's only consul and had 2 loyalists elected to serve out the rest of the year. It's interesting to note that Caesar had apparently decided that the office of consul was no longer needed to dominate Roman politics. That could be done from his special golden chair that was definitely not a throne.
Yep, and we've already seen this process begin, like many of these processes. But, the consulship will become a solely symbolic position, and over time it will come to mean not much at all. It will become a position with basically no power, and we're sort of seeing that at the moment.
On December 31st, in what would have been his last day in office, one of these new consuls unexpectedly dropped dead. Caesar stopped everything and called for an emergency election so that a new consul could serve out the rest of the term. Some other loyalist named Caninius won, and he would be in office for a grand total of something like 4 hours.
Wow, I mean, that is what I would call a stable political institution, huh?
Cicero was livid. All Caninius wanted was the prestige of having been elected consul, and Caesar was happy to just give it to him.
Yep.
Never before had the consulship been used in this way.
And from this point forward, it will always be used that way. It's a pretty sudden shift, but basically from now on, there were some years of strife in between Caesar and Augustus, but the consulship is basically done as a powerful institution for the rest of Roman history.
Cicero was right to be angry. Caesar was showing everybody that it didn't really matter who the consuls were anymore. The whole thing was outrageous. Around this time, Caesar really buckled down and started preparing for his next military campaign.
Okay.
The Parthian Empire had sided with Pompey during the Roman Civil War.
Back to the Persians. The eternal enemy of the Romans. We always return to the Persians. That'll be true for a while through the Byzantine Empire. Well, not through the entirety of the Byzantine Empire, but, the first couple of years.
They were not a significant factor in any way, but still. Tensions were high, and many prominent Caesarians wanted revenge. On top of this, Rome's last major clash with the Parthians had ended in a humiliating defeat, and there was a vague sense among Rome's general population that somebody needed to wipe the slate clean. So that was one issue. War with Parthia was on the horizon. A totally separate and unrelated issue was that the Dacians were openly crossing the Danube and raiding the province of Illyricum. In fact,
Yep, and this can be... I've heard it pronounced Dacia. That's how I would pronounce it. Of course, if you're pronouncing it as they would have at the time, it would be Dacia. And Dacia is, what would become Romania, basically. I mean, there's a lot of intermixing, the Slavs show up, blah, 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 but a lot of Romanians would claim their ancient ancestors to be the Dacians. Whether that's, ethnically true or not, that's sort of the belief.
In fact, this had been happening since Caesar's time as Illyricum's governor. Instead of dealing with this problem back then, Caesar had sent Illyricum's legions to fight in the Gallic Wars. Since that time, the whole situation had spun out of control. Caesar's plan was to cross the Danube and spend a year campaigning in Dacia, after which he would march directly to Parthia and spend 2 years campaigning there. The plans for after the Parthian campaign are a little more vague, but from what we can piece together, the idea was to swing north of the Black Sea and then march all the way back to Rome.
Whoa.
All told,
That is pretty ambitious. If that's true, if that's really what he planned, that is completely uncharted territory for the Romans, right? I don't believe there had been a Roman expedition in that area before. I mean, they're going around the Black Sea, around Crimea. That's pretty far out of the way of current Roman borders.
this would be a massive expedition. Caesar
Yeah.
began the long process of recruiting and transporting as many as 80,000 infantry
Whoa.
and 10,000 cavalry up to Illyricum.
Okay.
In December of 45, he sent his great-nephew Octavian to oversee the training of the legions.
There he
Once
is.
everything was ready, the plan was for Caesar, Lepidus, and Antony to depart with the legions. And
Wow, we have got the whole crew. If you want to look at the whole who's important crew, well, Caesar, of course. He's not going to make it much longer. But we've got the whole post-Caesar crew here. Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian. It's all coming together.
for Octavian to return to Rome and take Lepidus's place as Caesar's official number 2. At some point during this process, people started to speak of an ancient prophecy that said that only a king could defeat the Parthians.
Uh-oh.
Cicero makes it very clear that no such prophecy existed, and that this was just a wild rumor that sprang out of nowhere. Who started this rumor? We can't say for sure, but I have my suspicions.
Yeah, could have popped up anywhere. I have a feeling it might have come from the Caesarian camp. Caesar's planning a conquest against the Parthians. Suddenly, an old prophecy springs up, real or maybe not real, that, only a king could defeat the Parthians. It's quite a coincidence.
Early in the year 44 BCE, the Senate decided to bestow another title upon Caesar. This one's a biggie.
Wow.
They extended Caesar's 10-year dictatorship indefinitely, naming him
Ooh.
Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life.
Well, there you go.
This was a turning point. Up until now, Caesar's critics could always comfort themselves with the fact that Caesar's powers would expire after 10 years.
Well, initially, the rationale behind the Senate granting Caesar all of these powers was that they wanted to satisfy him for now so that maybe they could maintain some of their authority, and then, 10 years later, 10 years down the line, when his power ran out, maybe he would be weak enough that they could push him out of power, or someone else could push him out of power, and the Senate could reassert themselves. So, regardless of what you think about that initial decision, and I think it was probably a bad idea to grant Caesar everything he wanted, there was a bit of rationale behind it. You could understand where they were coming from. But at this point, dictator for life, it seems like the Senate, which is of course filled with Caesar's supporters, is basically just allowing Caesar to do whatever he wants. They're submitting to him, basically.
This was no longer the case. Caesar's critics had some real soul-searching to do.
Yeah.
Immediately after naming Caesar dictator for life, the ancient sources say that the Senate took a loyalty oath to Caesar. The exact
Wow.
wording was, "I pledge to preserve Caesar's life," or "May Caesar outlive me." But in the last few decades, scholars have been rethinking this. We now know that "or may so-and-so outlive me" was a popular turn of phrase during this period. By the time the ancient sources were writing, the phrase had fallen into disuse, and so when they say that the Senate took a loyalty oath, they may be mistaken. Just be aware that this is still being hotly debated behind the scenes.
I like that. I like the inclusion of sources and new historical interpretations. Always good to keep up on the newest research. And there is newest research. I mean, we're dealing with sources thousands of years old, but we're always finding new things, new archaeological evidence, new ways of interpreting sources that we have. So I always appreciate when creators include that sort of stuff in their videos.
As I've mentioned, many in the Roman political class were alarmed at Caesar's growing authoritarianism. But at this time, 3 incidents occurred in rapid succession that turned that alarm into a full-blown panic.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Here's the first incident. One day, after voting to invest Caesar with even more titles and powers, a bunch of senators decided to go and present the legislation to Caesar in person. One of the consuls at the time led the procession, senators followed behind, lictors escorted them, it was a whole thing. Caesar was off overseeing a construction project and was in the weeds talking with one of his colleagues. As the senatorial procession approached, Caesar didn't acknowledge them. He kept on talking. After a long moment, somebody got Caesar's attention and was like, "It appears that the Roman Senate would like a word with you."
I will say, just the fact that the Senate came to him in the first place, I mean, this is behavior that really looks like a monarchical system. Your political elites are catering to your king, basically. I mean, this is very Louis XIV Versailles type stuff. The Senate is coming to Caesar to present legislation to him. This is, not super Republican in nature. And though, of course, Caesar is not officially a king, like I said, this is very king-like. Just this alone, not even counting Caesar's lack of acknowledgement of the Senate.
In response, Caesar lazily looked over, looked back, and returned to his conversation.
Oh, man.
Not only was this behavior extremely rude, but the Romans placed a lot of cultural importance on standing for certain occasions.
Well, yeah, it's extremely disrespectful, but it's also making the point, Caesar's making the point that the Senate is on his beck and call. He has them under his thumb, they respond to his orders, and that's that.
Being approached by a Roman consul was absolutely one of those times when a person was expected to stand. And this wasn't just a Roman consul. This was a Roman consul with a senatorial delegation at his back. By making such a big show of not rising to his feet, Caesar was broadcasting to the world that in his opinion, he outranked a Roman consul. Caesar's critics were justifiably outraged at this behavior. Here's the second incident.
Okay.
As the sun rose on a winter morning, one of
Caesar's new statue.
the statues of Caesar appeared with a diadem on its head.
Uh-oh.
The diadem was a special kind of headband worn by monarchs, particularly Eastern monarchs. Clearly, this was some kind of subversive act, so 2 tribunes of the plebs ordered it taken down. A few days later, Caesar appeared before a crowd for some kind of public event, and was greeted with cries of "King! King! King!"
Oh my. This does make me wonder, we've been getting a lot of talk about the reaction of the political elite, the senators, to Caesar, and we're getting that because, throughout most of history, this time period included, most of our sources come from the elite and describe the elite from their perspective. So I do wonder, what has been the reaction of the general public to this whole business? We saw that the people seemed to be unhappy with Caesar's triumphs that he held celebrating the defeat of other Romans, so there was that. But Caesar has always been a generally popular figure, so I do wonder, what do the people in general feel about Caesar's flaunting of these political norms? Are they disgusted? Do they not care? I'm sure there's a variety of opinion, but I am curious, and maybe we'll find some of that out here.
Caesar turned to the crowd and replied, "Not king, but Caesar." This was a pun that doesn't work in English.
Oh.
King, or Rex, was a common last name in Caesar's time. So on one level, the joke was like, "You've got the wrong guy. I'm not Rex, I'm Caesar."
I mean, look, whatever you say about Caesar, he's still out there cracking jokes. You know, he may have lost some of that PR that he used to have, but he can still appeal to a crowd.
But the pun also worked on a second level, as if to say, I can see how you would be confused, because the word Caesar and the word king are synonymous. The crowd immediately got the joke, and according to the ancient sources, they didn't like it. They went dead quiet.
Oh.
Some believe.
Well, maybe that's a sign of how the public felt about this whole business. They were not really amused by Caesar's power grabs. Okay, interesting.
That the people calling out king may have been Caesarian plants, and judging by the crowd's reaction, that sounds right to me.
Okay.
The same two tribunes of the plebs ordered those who had started the chant arrested. Caesar intervened and was like, "It's fine, no need to stir up trouble." The tribunes did not like this, and later issued a written statement saying that Caesar was trying to interfere with their lawful duties.
Wow, I think these are the political officials with the most spine, the most backbone out of anybody we've seen so far. Just standing up to Caesar even a little bit, that's more than most others have done.
At the next Senate meeting, Caesar denounced the two tribunes and went one step further and accused them of planting that diadem from days earlier just to make him look bad. Caesar had packed the Senate with his political allies, so of course they went along for the ride. One senator went so far as to demand the death penalty for the two tribunes for making Caesar look bad, I guess.
Well, I guess this is what happens when you stand up against Caesar. And this is the point it's gotten to. To be fair, there were more opportunities to stand up sort of earlier down the line. I know there was a whole civil war about this. I understand that. But, you know, it just kept getting worse and worse. So now we're at the point where this video was titled "Caesar is King." Yeah, Caesar is basically a king, you know, in all but name. And at this point, we're getting close to name. You know, people are calling out king, king, which were probably planted by Caesar. So, you know, it's really, everything's sort of gone off the edge. It's out of control.
Instead, Caesar decided to appear merciful, and the two tribunes were stripped of office and banished from the city of Rome.
Jesus.
This was a shock.
That's merciful, by the way. For the offense of, you know, standing up for the law, basically, they are getting banished, and that's merciful.
Shocking show of force. And the worst part is that nobody even tried to stop it.
Damn.
Caesar's critics were beginning to see the writing on the wall.
I will say, I don't want to, like, moralize this or, you know, politicize it necessarily, but I do think there's a lesson here about sort of creeping authoritarianism. You know, if you keep letting it get worse, and an authoritarian keeps abusing their power one step after the other, you know, you eventually get to a point where, one, it's too late, and two, if people do speak up, no one speaks out to help them. And maybe if people did speak out to help those tribunes, things might have gone a different way. I don't know. But there is definitely a lesson here about creeping authoritarianism. And like I mentioned earlier, you can also see why Caesar has, ever since Caesar, been such a controversial historical figure and political figure. I mean, he's been used as a political allegory many times throughout history.
The Roman Republic was on the verge of plunging off a cliff, and the vast majority of the political class did not care. Something needed to be done.
Yeah. And also, you can, I mean, I think a lot of us know what's going to happen. We are also now sort of seeing the build-up to the eventual end of this situation, to the end of Caesar. You know, you're sort of seeing how it got to that point.
Here's the third incident.
Okay.
A little less than a month later, on February 15th of the year 44, Everybody came out to celebrate Lupercalia.
Ah.
Lupercalia was a fertility festival where a bunch of male priests would strip down to loincloths or nothing at all and run around the Palatine Hill.
I remember this. We got a reaction on this in the Historia Civilis playlist. I don't remember if it's public or members only, but, this was a very strange celebration.
The path of the original Pomerium. These priests carried fake whips, and any woman touched by a whip was said to become extremely fertile for the coming year.
A bunch of naked priests running around whipping women. What? And it's just very strange.
Women would spill into the street and try to block the runners. The runners would use their fake whips to clear a path. The whole thing was stupid fun. Caesar had made good on his commitment to Antony, and the two men were now serving side by side as Rome's two consuls for that year. Antony made the strange choice of volunteering to lead the Lupercalian runners.
I mean, look, I understand different cultural contexts, things that they saw as weird, we see as normal, things that we see as weird, they saw as normal, so I completely understand and respect that, but from my perspective, it's just such a sort of funny and odd ceremony.
It's not every day that you get to see a head of state running naked through the streets. Each their own, I guess. Caesar wisely chose to keep his clothes on and watched the day's celebrations from a raised platform alongside other high-ranking officials.
That was best.
Since this was a festival day, he wore his flamboyant purple toga and his laurel leaves. When Antony was finished running, he approached the raised platform.
What is that?
Presented Caesar with, most English translations say a crown, but it was actually another diadem.
What are you doing?
The crowd went silent. Was this it? Was Caesar going to crown himself right here? Was this the moment when Rome becomes a monarchy once more?
Oh my.
After milking it for a moment, Caesar pushed the diadem away, much to the relief of the crowd. Antony then ascended the platform and presented it to Caesar for a second time, according to one source actually putting it in Caesar's lap. The crowd fell into another stunned silence. All Caesar had to do was put it on his head, and the world would be forever changed. Caesar rejected it for a second time. The crowd burst into wild applause.
Okay, is this Antony doing just a very odd thing, or is this choreographed? Because I don't know. This potentially seems like it could be like one of those PR situations that Caesar has traditionally been so good at, sort of putting on a show for the crowd. I don't know.
He told the crowd that there was only one true king of the Romans, and that person was Jupiter Optimus Maximus. He ordered the diadem taken to Jupiter's main temple and put on display. So what should we take away from this incident?
Okay.
It's highly dramatic, and it seems to have played out a little too perfectly. In my opinion, it's pretty clear that Antony and Caesar coordinated the whole thing ahead of time.
I'm glad he's giving this summary of the incident, because that's exactly what I thought as well. I mean, perhaps it could have been just off the cuff. Antony decided to do this, or I don't know. But, I mean, exactly what I said. This sort of seems like a choreographed incident. Caesar's been doing all these power grabs. People aren't too happy. He's flirting with being a king. The public and the political elites especially really don't like that. And so he choreographs this piece of theater, basically, in order to show, even if I'm offered the crown, I refuse it. I don't want it. That's not me. And Historia Civilis said that the crowd reacted very well. So it does seem like a planned event.
Cicero reached the same conclusion. He later asked Antony, would you have us believe that you found a diadem on the street, or did you instead bring it from home?
There's Cicero. I like Cicero. He's a smart guy. Smart, practical guy. And, hearing that he reached the same conclusion makes me even more confident that it probably was choreographed beforehand.
Some say that this Lupercalia incident was Caesar testing the waters. If the crowd had been into it, he would have accepted the diadem. Others say that this was a performative rejection of the crown, staged so that he could continue to wield his other king-like powers as he wished.
So, I mean, to be fair, basically either way, it was staged. He knew this was going to happen beforehand, and either he knew he was going to refuse the crown, or he was going to wait and see the reaction of the crowd, and if it was positive, decide to go through with it. Now, I don't know if that was the case, because we've seen that the reaction to Caesar doing all of these monarchical things has been pretty negative. So if he was aware of that, then I feel like he probably wasn't intending to actually crown himself. But we've also seen Caesar's ego at this point is pretty inflated. So maybe he thought that there was actually a chance that the crowd would cheer and egg him on. I don't know. I guess we can't truly tell.
I'm kinda in the first camp.
Okay.
Caesar was vain. He liked being flagrant and wearing his triumphator outfit during festivals. He liked his special little golden chair that was definitely not a throne.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it depends how inflated Caesar's ego and his vanity have become at this point. I mean, they seem to have really overtaken many of his more positive qualities, and if it really has gotten to that point, he may have been deluded enough to think that this is something people really wanted, and if he got a positive reaction, he would have went through with it. That's absolutely a possibility.
He liked all of the pomp and circumstance. My feeling is that in his heart, he wanted a crown.
Oh, he clearly wanted it.
Around this time, perhaps literally on the same day, a priest named Sparina, who specialized in divination, approached Caesar and told him that his life would be in danger until the Ides of March, or March 15th. Divination is not a thing, so where did Sparina get this idea? Remember last year, when a cabal of senators tried and failed to recruit Antony to their cause? That particular group fell apart, but it was not the first or last conspiracy of its kind.
Nope.
Since that time, Caesar's authoritarian behavior had become extremely alarming, and senators were talking about it behind the scenes. Sparina was enmeshed with this group.
Wow. So, that's so curious. So it's sort of framed as divination or a prophecy or something, but in reality, is actually something that Sparina has heard about and is letting Caesar know. Because usually, I mean, I'm not a believer in divination or anything, I just think these things were made up, but she actually has the inside scoop. It's just being framed in a different way.
He may have been a senator himself, and if not, he certainly fraternized with them. The most likely scenario is that Sparina overheard something, but when he told Caesar about it, he wanted to keep it nice and vague, so that he didn't implicate any of his friends. But where did that specific date come from? The Ides of March. It was widely known that Caesar was planning to leave on campaign shortly after the Ides. By giving that date, what Sparina was really saying was that Caesar's life would be in danger so long as he remained in the city of Rome. Sparina was exactly right. There was a conspiracy, and Caesar's life was in danger. The conspirators had not yet decided when or how to strike, but they were in perfect agreement that Caesar could not be allowed to leave the city alive.
Uh-oh. Wait for the outro. And there we go. With Historia Civilis, we always gotta wait for the outro. Wow. That was a really good one. I mean, look, Historia Civilis' videos are just always excellent. And they get better as time goes on. And so we're getting to some of the newer ones, and we're getting to the end of Caesar's journey. These videos are just top quality. Next time we've got the assassination of Julius Caesar. It's all coming to an end. And then after that, we start following the post-Caesar years. So I think that will be pretty exciting. Once again, apologies for my voice being weird. I'm super congested right now, but there's not much I can do about it, so I'm just trying to trying to work through it and record these videos for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, I would appreciate it if you would check out the Patreon or become a channel member for exclusive reaction content. I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.